Good morning, Kaz. Nice to see
Hey,
your
good morning,
face.
John.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Kaz, you've affectionately earned the single moniker nickname Kaz, very affectionately known throughout the industry. I don't think I know anyone that doesn't know you as Kaz. We've worked together. I've known you for probably 12 years. I first was introduced to you as one of 10 technology fellows at Bank of America, a very rarefied title and role. But for the audience, why don't you introduce yourself? Give us a quick background.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. Well, first of all, I do go by Kaz. Um, um, Prince was already taken. Basically, I'm a versatilist, which the short definition of that is someone who's mastered a number of topics and has been able to transform from one topic to another with relative ease. So during my 40-year bank IT career, by the way, that's not the total IT career, but that's my 40-year banking IT career. I've done everything from mainframes to hybrid cloud deployments. I've done everything from multiple software technologies, going all the way back to assembler, COBOL, Java, and as well as many kinds of integration plumbing, going all the way back to sockets. That's a very old word, through Corba, messaging, SOAP, REST, and even webhooks for integration into event-driven architectures. So I managed to hopscotch my way around a lot of technologies during that 40-year period of time. I was very grateful to having a very long career at B of A, 33 years, and then followed by almost a 10-year career at MUFG Union Bank. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it.
You have a very unique perch in the space and a unique lens, being a versalist, being a practitioner, being a chief architect, being a developer and technologist, as part of your different roles, from Bank of America to MUFG, as Mitsubishi Union bought, or Mitsubishi Bank of Tokyo bought Union to become one of the big banks in the US, and taking an API first approach to their subsequent sell to US Bank. You've had a front seat to a lot of big technology and business initiatives. What's your position right now on real-time integration and APIs? Give us the good, the bad, the lessons learned, the
Well,
opportunities.
yeah. So the watchword at MUFG was banish batch, which is right, like everything needs to be real time. Now, that's a very cool buzzword. Banish batch, everything real time. As you well know, there's a lot to unpacking that and making that a real story. The fact of the matter is, many organizations have application portfolios that span decades, right? And so is to move to all real time and APIs, and I would include events within that, right? Because event driven is oftentimes, requires you have to rethink where the data lives. How do I get to the data? How easy it is to get to the data? How easy it is for me to or aggregate or orchestrate that data? So there's some definite challenges. And then along that journey, just along that integration journey, imagine there's very few Corba implementations. I mean, at this stage of the game, hopefully there's almost none, but there might be a few. I know of at least one bank that actually has some distributed objects still. I mean, that's a 25-year-old technology, but they're still in existence. But anyway, over that movement to real time, we've created a lot of integration artifacts. We started with messaging. We had Corba, distributed objects, which is essentially Corba. We have SOAP. We had pre-SOAP XML. We had pre-SOAP, pre-XML, messaging running on antiquated socket type technology. So believe it or not, when you look at the portfolio of an organization, and if you dig deep enough, you're going to find those pockets of integration still in existence. So not only do you have to banish batch, but you also have to really bring your real-time portfolio up to speed. I mean, nobody's going to use SOAP anymore unless they have to, right? I say that, but the truth of the matter is there's still an awful lot of business digital channels still using SOAP-based interfaces. We want to use REST, and then now we talk about REST, open API spec, or we can use the graph query languages with ODSs. So I mean, honestly, when you talk about let's go real time, but it's also just a large amount of artifacts to deal with, which is one of the reasons why just saying, hey, let's go real time with integration, that there's a lot to unpack.
Can you put some numbers around that? So if you look at a
Yeah,
portfolio,
no, I would be happy to put some numbers around that. So I think what got me started on this quantifying that was going back to B of A back in the 2005, 2006. When we took we were gathering that information, and we were just gathering interfaces, real-time interfaces. At the time, we had about 5,000. And that really, if we added in MQ into the mix, we probably would have added another 1,500. You're dealing with at least 5 or 6 or 7,000 real-time interfaces. Now, when you start looking at that number of interfaces, clearly there's a lot of them that you don't want to use. Clearly, there's something that you have to do to not only just codify those things, like put a taxonomy around them, but to actually understand which ones are which ones go where, why do they go where they go, and if you're going to modernize a portion of that portfolio, which ones do I want to modernize first? Those are all the questions you have to ask yourself when you start looking at that number. So fast forward, if I could take that journey from 2005, where we used a domain model and we aligned the integrations to a domain model. If I fast forward that to the 2017 through 20 core banking transformation at MUFG, again, different organization, roughly the same number of real-time APIs. I mean, it's funny how it works out that way. It doesn't make any difference. You can go from one organization to another, and the number is going to be in the thousands. And if it's less than 10,000, you're probably pretty good, right? But that's still a hell of a lot of interfaces to look at. So if I fast forward to that, again, we applied similar techniques. We had a domain model, and we were using Buy-in, actually, to be candid with you, as a domain model for banking. So it helped us organize the functions, and from that we were able to go forward with what is our target. Look, we take out the ones that are duplicates, take out the ones which we didn't want to go to that system of record anymore, and we actually narrowed that down to around 1,500. And by APIs, I actually mean functions, business functions within the APIs. So the APIs themselves, as a quote unquote SOAP definition, and more importantly, as a Swagger REST definition, it could be 250, right? With a number of methods, operations within that, leading you to that 1,500. And that took a lot of work, John. In fact, I'm kind of going on, but that actually, with an inventory, first of all, the inventory was not complete at MUFG, so we had to get the inventory. The analysis of that inventory and the subsequent, what do we want as our target, was about a 6 month worth of work. Myself and I'd hired a consultant to help me with that. And that's only because I actually already had the expertise, right? That's only because I've been doing this since 2005, 2006. That's quite a bit of work, categorizing everything, understanding its actual usage, and what was impacted by a large transformation that was going to basically take out about 50 applications and have to integrate with another 150 applications. I'll stop there.
That's a good segue, though, because I think our audience will be very interested in that journey. We worked with you closely on a lot of that, and I think even now our customers use the Ignite platform as part of that inventory. They want to know how many APIs and services and events and integrations do we have? What is our coverage? What is our gap against the taxonomy and capability model? Which ones are good and which ones are not, and why
Right.
against
And we,
governance and security?
and we were power, as you know, we're power users of the Ignite platform, right? At my last gig, and that we actually lifted all of the quote unquote canonicalization that we had already done, and we converted all of that into actually using your tooling. It was very easy to convert that into RESTful representations, right? Swagger REST representations of that. So we actually, and then we used a piece of your technology, which gave us the ability to create the template, right? I know we talked about this. This is something that we used as the business template, which gave us some lift. So as we started looking at the actual application specifications, right? Specifically REST or Kafka, right? We were able to leverage all of that work, and for our development teams to go out there and then build those APIs based around a really well-grounded, pick list, so to speak. If you're working with a blank piece of paper, a blank piece of paper is the absolute worst thing for a writer or an architect, because you have to say, well, is it earth, fire, wind, and water? Is it the periodic table of elements? Or what exactly am I working with? So having some sort of grounding, a taxonomy basis, some sort of representation of what the customer data looks like, what a deposit data looks like, what a wealth management, treasury management service looks like in my world of banking. Something to work with. It's a whole lot easier, John, to work from a coloring book. And I think that is my actual secret sauce. If you can tell anyone anything, get the coloring book. You can be a lot more successful with a coloring book than you can with a blank piece of paper.
If I keep using the analogy of the coloring book, I look at what you did for the first 6 months of the inventory, of the analysis of the target state, and what that coloring book and the lines gave you was a massive amount of value. So that first 6 months was spent in a very powerful way, organizing with. Look at all the stakeholders you had. You had the architecture and the target state. You had the business that wanted to be an API first major bank in the US. You had a third party SaaS vendor that you're bringing on to do the core system replacement. You had multiple contractors that had to either take your designs and build off of them, or just build from scratch. And who knows what you'd end up with.
Actually, you had about a 9-month runway in quote unquote pre-plan, and nobody really cared that we actually organized, so that we were actually able to organize during that 6 to 9 month period. And so we were actually able to come to the actual starting gate with an awful lot of information already there. So our APIs were actually up to the races, because you're right, we had a system integrator. We had a technology partner we were integrating with. We had existing channels and existing systems of record that we actually had, that 50 that are being replaced and 150 that I have to actually integrate with. So a lot of that analysis was actually done. Now, obviously not all of that was done with digitalML.
I think as an architect, and the analogy of the coloring book is nice, but you have a lot more value as a great architect, and you are a great architect, when you're able to attach to different usage of the architecture and coloring book and guide and map. And so I'm going to come back to the attachment to business initiatives and to technology initiatives. But while we're talking about the use of this information, as you're capturing these details in this information and the
Right.
descriptions that come with it, can you tell the audience how that's being used, how that's used from architecture decisions, but also from developer decisions? As an application developer, I've got to consume these APIs that are available. It's really hard to consume an API and rely on an API that you don't have confidence in, that you don't have information
Right.
on, that you have to go chase people on, that you don't know what happens when it gets changed and who's changing it. Tell us a little bit about the practitioner side of that.
I can tell you by way of a true story. When I first came to MUFG, I would go to meetings because I was the chief integration architect, and we were talking about consuming an API, just consuming a basic, let's just pick a customer API. Well, this can't be that difficult. I mean, you've got a quote unquote specification, and I kind of sort of know who's using it. I mean, it wasn't really well organized, but I kind of know who's using it. And I would go into meetings, and it would be like tribal knowledge. I would have to have 15 people, business analysts, product owners in a room, and developers in a room trying to figure out what this thing did. I'm like, that's impossible. Why is it taking an hour meeting to describe what this is doing? Well, so here's where this problem was. Well, number one, an awful lot of the interfaces were just actually the semantics were based completely on the system in which they were exposed, the data was being exposed from. So so the data wasn't really well documented, or as they used to say in the olden days of assembler, it's all self-documenting, right? So it was self-documenting APIs, which were documented by people who really didn't write documentation for a living. And they didn't really describe the use cases for that API. So so what you see when you go in, when you see that kind of an environment, you realize they need a platform. They need a way to actually get at the data a number of different ways that helps them not only just see the use of that API, but really explores what does it mean, and that's where a platform like digitalML, comes, really stands out. Now, we used other technologies at B of A before there was digitalML. Obviously, I've been doing this from spreadsheets on up, but that was one of the first lessons that we learned at B of A. After we did all that analysis, after we did all the technical mumbo jumbo, we actually had to create a dashboard that actually helped the audiences, right? And sometimes the business is interested because they want to know what they can monetize. The developers are clearly interested in what they can reuse because they don't want to have to write anything if they don't have to. And what we found is that the dashboard is actually probably the most important part of the whole thing. So once you get the coloring book, you got to show them, and the coloring book analogy works as it's a dashboard. You can go to the dashboard and you can easily find the API that you want to use. And by the way, if you're putting governance around that coloring book, you can say, don't use page 1, use page 6.
It's a dashboard, it's a marketplace, it's a portal, it's a catalog. There's a lot of different names for the interface, but the idea is the same. The idea is to give a central source of truth that different users are able to find what they're looking for, quickly find what they're looking for.
Not all users are created equal. I mean,
That's
quite
right.
honestly, a developer is interested in plumbing and element names, right? How do I call this? How do I create, how do I basically take that interface and bringing it into my work and actually just call it, even if it's stubbed out. The business on the other side of it, they go, well, we have these APIs. Which ones do we monetize? Well, I can kind of lead you there. I can't really tell you your business model. I mean, you want to talk about payments? Well, we can go over to this as an inventory of payment related APIs. Now, some of these APIs were designed for internal use, so they're not externally, so they don't have all of the attribution, or they maybe have redacted some of the attribution that you want if you're going to expose it to an outside, technology partner, right? So, but again, you're going to have different audiences, and of course, the auditors. And I don't want to leave the auditors out of the picture because, frankly, between cybersecurity and the auditors, and they actually, what they're interested in is, can you reliably show the lineage and show the process, and does it make sense, right? So that, you're going to have different stakeholders looking at this data. We found that by just tagging the metadata in different formats, we could appeal to a wider range of audience. And I think that's kind of the benefit of a product like digitalML, being able to provide different perspectives.
There's a flywheel effect to it, isn't there? There's the different stakeholders and users, from architects to API designers and API owners to API consumers. to security and compliance, both internally and more and more with regulatory compliance.
Right. What are the various roles and what can they get to? Now, the implementation may or may not be directly related, but the ability to port that, into various technologies is really important. I find that much of the audience isn't so much interested in the lowest level detail. There's a few people who are interested, like the network people, et cetera, but many people just want to get a lay of the land, right? They want to have a fairly in-depth view of, of their portfolio, their API portfolio, their integration portfolio, when I say API, I talk about real-time integration.
Could you explain that a little bit more? Why does a CIO want a real-time view? Why does an architect want the whole view? Why does a business want a view and what they're paying for? Why do the different stakeholders want that view, and what's the value of that view to them?
Well, the one you paid for it once, and now you get to reuse it many times, right? I mean, I think the most obvious part is, the cost of having a CAS come in and organize the portfolio or be in every meeting and tell you what the answer is really, I can't stretch that far. No one can stretch that far. So the idea is, as an old boss once said, it's not architecture if you don't write it down, right? And I would add to that, if you can't find it, don't bother writing it down.
Yeah.
So write it down and then have the ability to find it and and empower people to use it. That's the real secret sauce in any organization. And that goes all the way back. I mean, that goes way back before APIs, way back before APIs. I mean, good documentation is a quote unquote thing of the past, right? So in some perspectives, the reality is we have lots of different sources of the truth, and nobody knows which one is actually the source of the truth. So having a platform which can be considered a source of truth that can be used by multiple stakeholders, that's a real value.
We've talked a little bit about flexibility. This ties into automation and also the end-to-end life cycle, having the end-to-end views, having the ability for different stakeholders to do stuff with the APIs, produce them, change them, consume them, use them. When you think about, we've also talked a little bit about buy-in and tied into TOGAF a little bit. When you think about flexibility and you think about the portfolio and your APIs, what recommendations do you have on how to get that flexibility? Flexibility to deploy to different pipelines, to different runtimes, flexibility to make changes, flexibility to support different users. What's your advice on flexibility?
In order to be flexible, you kind of have to be organized, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, in order to have the flexibility to go from one thing to another thing, I at least have to have the basic understanding of the ingredients, right? I'll just go back to that perspective. So the more you're well organized, the better, the more flexible you can be because you have more options to you.
On the topic of flexibility, you and I have talked a lot about enabling good thinking, and you've used as a practitioner TOGAF and buy-in to create the abstraction layer. You've enabled good design practices and good knowledge and having a view of the knowledge to make those decisions. What recommendations do you have to the other practitioners on enabling good thinking and good decision making?
Okay, this is going to sound almost like an ageist perspective. I would say you have to learn when you stop evangelizing and start practicing. I mean, honestly, there is no real substitute. And again, this is a person who's coming from a 40-year career in the rearview mirror, and there's really no substitute for actual practice. The people that I know that I have the most respect for actually do some of the work. The reason why I've had any success at all, John, just any success at all in my career, is that I was always very forthright with both business and my whoever was my boss and stakeholders. I want to be really transparent about what I can deliver and when I can deliver it and what I need to deliver it. If you do that over and over again, you will have a reputation that they can call you Kaz. or they call you anything they want to, but the point is you will be able to you will have gravitas. You will be able to dictate the terms because they know you have credibility.
Affectionately and well earned, to be called Kaz. With that thread, and going back to APIs and data.
Yeah.
APIs are unlocking and exposing data, with security, with entitlements. In the age of APIs, in the age of ecosystems, in the age of public APIs that are driving revenue, what's your recommendation, and how do you see best the ability to curate from thousands of APIs your best APIs so that you can work with the business and take internal payments and expose it externally so that
Well,
you can promote and expose functionality to your partners and ecosystems and customers?
well, I think you already know the answer that you do have to have some scoring of your APIs, right? And I think you have a scorecard related to your API, right? Um, and some of that scoring comes from is how often is it used, but what's the data quality of that API? So the scoring system, whether it's an automated scoring system, and I've worked with manual scoring of the API inventory, that's kind of important because again, we live in a world, honestly, we live in a world in which there's even, we used to talk about there's tons of data and very little information. Now we live in an age in which there's just unlimited data, and there's still, where do you go for the right information? So to curate something implies that you've done some vetting. You've done something to make that, you've assessed it. You provided a score. Developers oftentimes have the knack for cloning the worst possible practices. It's almost as if the worst decisions are propagated faster than the best decisions. I don't know whether that's just true in society or just true true in society as a whole or just in IT. But I think that's one of the things you do in order to curate that portfolio. You really have to have, again, you can use automation. I think your tooling does some really good automation on that and that. When I look at all the startups, it reminds me of a friend of mine who was talking about new software, like Java or Python or Ruby on Rails or anything. Initially, people look at it and they go, yeah, that's fantastic. I look at how I could do that with like 3 sentences. Well, yeah, I can say hello world in a whole hell of a lot of sentences, just very few sentences. But you start building and building and building. What you start to realize as you get to be more of a practitioner and you start realizing the value, you start looking at where the depth is, right? So I would like something that curates, but I don't want to just do something that does a random curation generator, right? I don't need that. I need something that accelerates the process clearly, but I also want to use something that has some expertise or some basis in that. As I told you the other day, I was looking at a competitive product, and they were building an API, and it was building the API one branch at a time, one leaf node at a time. I was like, where's the place where I can say just substitute address for, I don't want to have to build my streets and my city and my state, my zip, my province if I'm in Canada, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to build all that from scratch, and I sure as heck don't want to build that every time. I will pay a great deal of money more for something that will finish the sentence, right? That has the expertise to finish the sentence, the accelerator that's built in. So it's kind of like you're scoring. I mean, you set the ground rules for what the score is, but if you can do some automation around that, some acceleration around that scoring, then you can have a much better curated portfolio that's self-managing. Back in the days when we built that API dashboard at B of A. So we built a dashboard at B of A, and oftentimes we also truthfully allow our developer community to add things into that dashboard. So then we'd run reports, and sometimes we'd see these weird problems. I think, so how is that weird? How is this data getting in here? So what we found that we actually had to built up various quality control routines to basically prevent people from entering bad information into the system so that it didn't get, accidentally exposed as hey, this is the greatest API since sliced bread. No, that's not the greatest API since sliced bread. So I
I think
know that.
this is how our customers think of it too. To get to the score, they want to bake in things like governance and standards and linting and design frameworks and security and policies. So it comes along for the ride. It's part of the process. To help automate, they want to remove a lot of the manual tasks that developers and designers do. And then they want to be able to build and deploy and consume and reuse reliable and consistent artifacts. And to do that, there's that flywheel effect of how they've baked in and automated the governance and then built the score out of that. And then as that flywheel effect moves on, you've got the complexity underneath the covers managed. You've got a well-documented API and how it's provided and how it's consumed and how it's mapped from source and target, what versions you're on, why it may be applicable for this use case and not. And then you build in the collaboration between the producer and the API owner and the consumer. Now the consumer can reliably consume that and know what version they're on and whether they should upgrade and find the documentation. The producer can make well-informed decisions on, hey, this is working well, we should keep doing this, or we need to support multiple versions, or we could go to the business and curate this for business opportunities. I think the way you're thinking about it is spot on. And when I look at our mature customers, that's the practice that they're trying to build.
Yeah, I don't want to run down. There's a lot of startups. There's a lot of people who build Hello World. I mean, that's actually fairly simple to build Hello World, which I'll save that story for another time, by the way. So we look at your product as an example, and I think I wanted a certain level of robustness. I had a vision. You already had a lot of that vision already there. And, you worked with us to actually extend that vision in the direction we wanted. Not every vendor is able to do that, frankly. And you have to sort of figure that out along the way. And then hopefully, and I do mean hopefully, the business doesn't want to pay for an army of Kazas to keep that thing going. They want a vision that can be developed, run, and I run with somewhat, I want to say the minimum amount of effort. I mean, there's always effort, like I told you before, that CI/CD pipeline, but you do want to look for something that's, satisfies your depth of vision, right? A partner that can get you to the finish line, right? And a partner that's going to work with you as that vision gives, we talked about this the other day, John. You never actually completely know what the business direction is going to be. The whole TOGAF construct is, hey, we're, IT is the handmaiden of handmaiden of the business, right? That's the whole, it starts, what does the business want to do? Well, so sometimes you go into a meeting and they go, Kes, we want to monetize our payment implementations. Okay, I hadn't thought about that, but here's my payment inventory. These are the ones which we could expose. These are the ones which we're going to have to work on, and sometimes the question is going to be, Kes, we need to cut off, all of that soap stuff. We're going to get rid of somebody. And by the way, a lot of this stuff comes because CEOs actually read a lot of magazines and think that all this stuff just happens automatically, right?
Magic.
So they go, or by the way, even worse, as a friend of mine is experiencing right now, I've got a matter requiring immediate attention. And I've got traceability around my portfolio of integration. And the answer has to be March 30th of 2024. I'm going, you're not going to satisfy, if you don't have all that information already stacked up, you're not going to make March 30th of 2024. Now, what you can do is you can say, this is how I will approach the process. This is the tooling I will need to get that job done. And this is the commitment I'm going to have of resources to make that happen. Now, will I deliver the entire thing in 2024? No, but I can deliver a start. I can show you demonstrable, tangible results. And I think that's what That's what gives you credibility, and that's what, aligning yourself with good technology partners does. It gives you credibility. And ultimately, people like myself who are in this business, they want credibility, right? They want the credibility, and they don't want to just jump from, well, some do, but and if you want to have any longevity in the career, you want credibility, and you want that credibility to move. If you move from organization, you want that credibility to follow you. So
it's one of my favorite informal success metrics when our customers, our key stakeholders, the people that bought into us and trusted us, are able to deliver when the CEO says, we want to do this. And they've got the tooling and the practice and the platform and the functionality to be able to quickly respond. And because of that, they get credibility, they get recognition. It's one of my favorite milestones. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being our customer. Thank you for being our partner. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, for the opportunity to talk after 3 cups of coffee. I hope that doesn't totally reflect it. All right, take care.
Take care. Thanks a lot.